SAS demonstration video, creating permanent SAS datasets. For this demonstration, I'm interested in creating a permanent SAS dataset from selected variables from the treatment of mild hypertension study. Specifically, I want to create a permanent SAS dataset of side effect scores. So I'm going to start this program with a libname statement. And the libname statement tells SAS the directory to either save or retrieve a SAS dataset. So after you have the word libname, we have a reference name, and here I'm using the reference name MyLip, and the reference name is telling SAS what directory to either save or retrieve that permanent SAS dataset. So in this program, we are telling SAS that we want to create a permanent SAS dataset and put it in the directory E:, which is where my flash drive is. Next, I have my data statement, and notice here that instead of having just a single name, we now have a two-part name. And so permanent SAS datasets are always referenced by two-part names. The prefix is the library reference or libref name, and here we've given the prefix MyLip. The second part of the name is the name that we're giving our SAS dataset. So here we are creating a SAS dataset, SE score, and we want to save it in the directory that's referenced by the libref name MyLip. Basically, the only thing that's different in this data step is that we have our data statement with a two-part name. From there, we're going to bring in the TUMS dataset like we've done before, and we're going to input selected variables, specifically variables related to side effect scores taken at baseline. There were 20 side effect scores taken at baseline, and there were 20 side effect scores taken at 12 months. And then we're going to create some new variables. We are going to create the difference in weight between baseline and 12 months, the difference in systolic blood pressure between baseline and 12 months, and then we are going to calculate the mean side effect score at baseline and the mean side effect score at 12 months. And then we are finally going to take the difference between the mean side effect from 12 months and baseline. And then we are going to attach a bunch of labels to these new variables that we've created. And we are going to format our randomization date with an MMDDYY10 format. And then lastly, we're not interested in including the individual side effect scores, so we're going to drop them from our data set. So in the end, the data set is just going to consist of these new variables that we created, and we are creating a permanent SAS data set SES score. And that's going to be saved in our E drive where my flash drive is. So let's run all this code and do a proc contents of our data set and see what it tells us. So here is the output from proc contents. And notice that our data set name now says mylib.ses score. Normally, when we run proc contents on a temporary SAS data set, the prefix is always work, because that's where temporary data sets are saved just for the session that SAS is open. And then we see that we have 100 observations and 14 variables in our permanent SAS data set. And if we go down, we see our 14 variables and all the labels that we created. And we see here that randomization date has this format, MMDDYY10. So if we use this data set in a later session, this is the information that will come up if we do a proc contents on the data set SE score. Now let's go ahead and print out the first 10 observations from our permanent SAS data set. And we see here these are our first 10 observations from this data set that we've just created. Now another thing we can do to get a view of this SAS data set is we can go to the Explorer window. Usually in all the programs that I've demonstrated, we've been looking at the results window in this left panel. But if we click on the Explorer window, we see that there's a content here called Libraries. And if we click on the libraries, it's going to list all the different places that SAS datasets are stored. So here, if we had created a temporary SAS dataset, it would have been stored in the work library. And when we exit out of SAS and return to SAS, if we were to open up this work directory, we wouldn't see anything. Notice that there's now a library called MyLip. And this MyLib is just the name that references to where permanent SAS datasets are saved. And in this case, we have a permanent SAS dataset saved in the E directory. So let's click on MyLib, and we see here is our SAS dataset SE score. And you'll notice this is the typical icon for a SAS dataset, where it has this little red dot in the corner. It looks like a little table. So let's click on our SAS dataset and see what happens. A new window is opened up. It's called the View Table window. And it's basically showing all of the observations in our permanent SAS dataset. And actually, again, if we had created a temporary SAS dataset and opened up the work library, we could also have viewed that dataset as well. So look at the column headings, and you'll notice that the column headings all reflect the labels we gave to the variables. So column headings, when we display a SAS dataset in the view table, are always the labels that were assigned, and if there were no labels assigned, then it would just be the actual variable name. So it can be very helpful when you're given a SAS dataset from a researcher or from the government that you've downloaded from the internet, to open it up in the Explorer window and then actually look at the data that's in the dataset. This concludes the SAS demonstration video on creating permanent SAS datasets. Now view the video on how to use a permanent SAS dataset.